How can an inanimate object embody and represent all the pain of a tragic life? How can an object that tries to recreate a living being so precious to him summarize the failure of his life? Because now he had the conviction that his life had been a failure, his mind, always so rational, always so sensible, tried to say no, that his life had been a success, because it had been a life devoutly devoted to duty, to serve to his homeland and the crown, to fight for what he believed was the welfare of his people. But his heart screamed that it had been a huge failure. His cruel and impertinent heart cried out, "Foolish man, your life has been a waste, a failure. The years will pass and then it will be decades and centuries, and nobody will remember you, nobody will remember your name, no one will appreciate your sacrifice, nobody will appreciate the days of loneliness and pain, nobody will miss you, Lord Melbourne. Foolish man, life is only as worth it if you have enjoyed it, if you have savored every inch of pleasure and happiness that can offer you, in the midst of so much effort and so much suffering. Only love and pleasure, only the warm arms and the sweet lips of a woman can make a man's life worthwhile, only love and passion can make it worthwhile to tread this horrible world. You were never loved, Lord Melbourne, your love was never reciprocated, your wife was never yours, her passion was for other men, her true love was for a man for whom she lost her head, but it was never for you. You foolish man, you should have sought love until you found it, you should rebel against your destiny, you should have fled from your condemnation, but you preferred to love your little queen, and you were so foolish that when she offered you an opportunity to have her, you rejected her as a duty. You were fool and cowardly, you did not fight to have her love, to possess her body, facing the world if it was necessary. The damn duty was the excuse to let her go that day in front of your beloved rooks, witnesses of your stupidity, and she soon forgot you, her capricious and ungrateful heart, it changed you for a little prince of brass. And now you contemplate that metal bird, that absurd toy that she gave you as a poor replacement to her physical absence, to her abandonment. That bird symbolizes your loneliness and your pain, your failure, a reminder that you did not want to run away from your cruel destiny. You had money, you had power, you could run away from duty, forget about politics, travel the world looking for a woman love you, and you die in her sweet arms and consoled by her love, but you preferred to go through the painful calvary of your absurd destiny and become in the slave of your little queen with beautiful blue eyes. That shouted his cruel heart, and he wanted to send it shut up, but he could not, because the pain he felt, the loneliness he suffered, the regret that tormented him, pushed him to listen to his heart. And he felt like the most miserable man in the world, and now at the end of his existence, he felt that his life had been a cruel and macabre joke, a waste. If at least the delicate hands of his little queen were there to caress him, if he could hear her sweet voice, if he could see her beautiful blue eyes and her girlish face, but she was not there, she had left forever, and in front of his eyes was only that toy, that little metal bird, just an inanimate object to accompany him in his solitude. And seeing the musical bird, Lord Melbourne collapsed in his armchair, closed his eyes and cried. Time passed and Lord Melbourne's illness worsened. Finally, the body of Lord Melbourne could not take any more and suffered a stroke, and one day he was lying on his bed, with a horrible physical appearance, very aged and deteriorated, his face pale and emaciated, and with half of his body rigid, paralyzed. He spoke with difficulty and a small thread of drool was spilling from his mouth when he spoke. Standing in front of him was Emma Portman. She cried inconsolably. "You cannot ask me for that, William. You cannot ask me to hide from Her Majesty the seriousness of your condition. You ask me to betray my friend and my queen, she will never forgive to me," exclaimed Emma. I wrote a letter, she will understand. We must protect her. I beg you, it is the last favor that I ask of you, a man who loves you like a sister, Lord Melbourne said with great difficulty. Then his deteriorated health continued to wane until that day, November 24, 1848, Lord Melbourne was at the gates of the final outcome. Lying in his bed, his image was very sad for anyone who had known him in his best years. He had become a premature old man, who looked 20 or 30 years older than his age, that for the average age and the life expectancy of his time already it was by itself a relatively advanced age. In the past he had been a handsome and strong man, now was a pile of bones and hides, his skin wrinkled and his eyes sad and off. He had the appearance of an unburied corpse, a body destroyed by old age and disease. Inside he had already resigned himself, and although he could not help feeling scared like all human beings in facing death, on the other hand, he felt a certain relief to see the end of his suffering, a life full of disappointment and sadness. Little by little he went into the final dream, began to feel that the darkness was invading him, that he stopped feeling the perceptions that his physical body transmitted to him, that the voices of those who were around his dying bed were fading, and that their silhouettes vanished, that their eyelids fell, and that an abnormal, overwhelming, thick darkness was spreading through their consciousness. But at the end of that darkness a light seemed to emerge, like at the end of a tunnel, a light to which it was approaching, while a sense of peace was invading him, and in that light diffuse silhouettes began to emerge, but in the bottom he felt he was familiar with familiar people. He wanted to reach that light and immerse himself in it. He wanted to approach those silhouettes and discover the people they belonged to. He wanted to find some comfort, some love. He wanted to find at last the love that had been so elusive in his life earthly, and that way Lord Melbourne fell into eternity, returning to be one with the whole and going into the pages of history and leaving behind the love that could never be, the love with Victoria. Victoria was in a Buckingham room, one day in late November 1848. She was talking to a maid when it entered the room Harriet, Duchess of Sutherland. Victoria gave permission to the maid to retire. She smiled, but her smile disappeared when she saw that Harriet's face was distorted by a gesture of pain and anguish. "Is something wrong, Harriet?" Victoria asked worriedly. "Your Majesty, I do not know how to say it. She wrote to me. She wrote to me because she is very affected, like to come. Emma wrote to me." "Ma'am, Lord Melbourne is dead," said Harriet, crying and her voice broken with emotion. Victoria's breathing became agitated and difficult, as if it were difficult for her to breathe, as if her lungs made a terrible effort to take each breath of oxygen. Victoria was standing and her whole body trembled violently. She felt a chill running through her, her legs were missing. Tears ran down Victoria's cheeks, her heart pounded violently. "No!" Victoria cried with all the strength of her lungs. Harriet backed away in shock. "It's a lie! It's a lie! He's not dead! Lord M. No!" Victoria shouted and fell to her knees on the ground, shouting and crying hysterically. Several servants came to Harriet's desperate pleas, and she and Miss Scarrett tried to calm her down, but Victoria was agitated in a violent fit of nerves. Albert came and tried to hold her, but she pushed him away and hid hysterically. On the Christmas 1848, the year Lord Melbourne died, Victoria was locked in her bedroom in Christmas Eve, sitting in front of the window, watching the snow fall while she cried. Then Albert entered the room. "Victoria, the children need you, it's Christmas Eve and you should be with them. You cannot continue like this, you cannot keep pushing us away," Albert said, trying to be nice, but unable to avoid a severe tone. "Albert, for your sake and for mine, it would be better to retire and leave me alone," Victoria replied very sternly, without hiding her displeasure. "Victoria, believe me, I try to understand. I know it was someone very important in your life, a friend to you, and I certainly cannot deny his virtues, but this..." Tried to reason Albert. "Do not be hypocritical, Albert. You always hated him and you despised him, you always talked bad about him, and you tried to make me forget about him. You forced me to get away from him, even to stop writing him. You must be happy, at last you got rid of him forever," Victoria replied with irony and resentment. "Victoria, that's mean of you. I try to understand your feelings, I..." answered Albert. "You, to understand the feelings of others. To understand human feelings you should be a human, and you are not. The feelings of mere mortals are unworthy of you, you know important, sublime things, of sciences, politics, economics. You are like a machine of those that excite you as much as a new toy to a child, perfect and efficient but cold and mechanical, devoid of soul. The feelings, the passion, those ridiculous and frivolous things, silly and animal things, are for us, the inferior beings that are not as perfect as you. Forgive me for being so human, my dear prince. And I beg God never to let you come down from your pedestal to muddy you with that despicable feeling that is pain, so that your tin heart can continue without beating. Victoria replied sarcastically and scornfully, with resentment. You're wrong, Victoria, today you taught me the meaning of pain, Albert said with moist eyes, and then turned around and left. Victoria was left alone and then saw in her lap the telescope that Lord Melbourne had given her on one of her birthdays, and she cried inconsolably, pouting.